I actually did a video shoot with some folks, and I was all in costume and everything. And
Is that I do remember seeing you in pictures of you running around as a Viking.
Yes. We that day we did one little shoot where they had us all in the van and they took us to the next location. And so we parked the truck and it was like 100 yards away. So we're over there and we're shooting this thing, and they roll up in a car, smash the window, reach in, grab all this stuff, and then pull off.
It's now the mash. It's now the monster mash. The monster mash. And it's a graveyard smash. It's now the mash. It's caught on in a flash. It's now the mash.
Welcome to Joel and Josh's Amazing Creatures,
where we take your fantasies and drag them grotesquely through reality.
I'm Josh.
And I'm Joel.
And today we're joined by a very special guest. Would you like to introduce yourself to our audience here?
I am Erik Braa. I'm a voice actor well known for voicing Draven in League of Legends and some characters in The Walking Dead. And, Duke Grabowski, the mighty swashbuckler. Duke Grabowski. And that's what I do.
That's brilliant. We're very lucky to have Erik here, graciously agreeing to join us on our podcast. Now, we were thinking a little bit about what we should do for this season finale. There's a lot of mythical creatures we are yet to cover, which are really good, and there's a lot of ones we've already done. But seeing as Erik has done some amazing voice work in the Walking Dead games, there was no real direction we could have gone other than zombies. So, when I say zombies to you, Erik, what comes into your mind? What kind of stuff do you think of?
Well, I immediately jumped to Walking Dead, obviously, but I think about the God, what would make that happen? I don't know. But yeah, people coming back from the dead, that's just
yeah,
it's kind of messed up.
It's a very interesting topic, and we figured out that zombies can pretty much be broken down into a set number of categories. First one being necromantic zombies, which are obviously brought back to dead via magic.
We're not really going to cover that.
Magic isn't
right.
Exactly
you can't really. There's no explanation, no scientific explanation for magic, right?
Exactly. So magic zombies not really our forte. The other one was something we did consider, though, wasn't it? About medically bringing people back to life.
Yes, it's kind of maybe in a Frankenstein's monster kind of way, or possibly.
Right. I guess I never thought about Frankenstein's monster as technically a zombie.
I guess so. Technically, it's just kind of the idea of using science to bring bodies like back from the dead and reanimating corpses, essentially.
It was an experiment in the 1800s which partially inspired Frankenstein, which although they had was a decapitated head and they just kept electrocuting it and the eyes would move around. That's where the idea of reanimating corpses came from in the sort of Victorian popular culture.
Wow.
But that was basically just their neurons going crazy because you're sending 50,000 volts through a head, isn't it?
I don't know if there's any spark actually going on inside the brain.
Exactly. So that was a bit off the cards as well. There was another kind of one which I didn't really think about initially, but it came up quite a lot, which was radiation zombies.
I don't know.
It was essentially along the lines of people exposed to radioactivity or dead bodies exposed to radioactivity, and in a very comic booky manner, that bringing them back to life.
Okay, radioactive. Right. I thought it was gamma rays, though.
Possibly. You'd also get a Hulk if you gamma rayed it. But essentially, there was just not quite enough grounding, because if you're exposed to someone to a lot of radiation, you don't tend to get a zombie.
Radiation sickness.
You get a lot of cancer and sickness.
Right, you get a lot of the body breaking down.
Exactly, which doesn't really work if we're wanting a dead body to hold together effectively.
Yeah, for sure.
But there was one...
It's like you can't really put a body in a microwave and expect it to...
Yes, it's very true.
It's just gonna heat and then burn up and...
But there was one other kind of zombie that we actually thought had some legs to it, and that's parasitic. Now they come in various shapes and forms, and one of them is viruses.
It's a popular idea because viruses are of course hard to kill. I mean, the last of antibiotics was discovered about 30 years ago, and there's an increasing trend in mutation for for pathogens to have antibiotic resistance. So it's quite likely that maybe within the next 30-50 years there'd be some kind of disease that could potentially wipe us out. Whether or not it makes us like zombies or not, that's a different matter altogether, but it's possible that there could be something.
Yeah, it makes me wonder, because what makes it What makes it want to feed on like living tissue?
The main bump in the road we came across, because the virus idea it really did have a lot going for it. However, we talked about vampires.
And we made that, it was based on rabies, wasn't it?
Yeah,
Yes.
we did basically rabies vampires who contracted a garlic allergy via their disease. We felt that if we made it a virus thing, we would have had too many similarities between our vampire and our zombie, and not quite enough differentiation in the episodes. So there was another thing which we figured out, was actually like, before we came to our final conclusion, the other thing we thought about was like actual living organism parasites. For example, ringworm.
Yeah. Yes.
Which is that horrible, nasty critter that lives inside your tapeworms and stuff like that actually feed off you and live inside a host.
Ringworms are kind of fungus. You're thinking of roundworms or pinworms.
Well, roundworms and pinworms there, but that's actually quite a good handoff, because we did eventually decide on what we should do, and that was fungal zombies.
Fungal?
Yes, there's various different kinds of infection you can get. We talked about this in our vampire episode as well, but do you want to just go over the different kinds of infection that you can get?
Okay, so obviously we just mentioned there are viruses which don't even have DNA themselves. They've got this thing called RNA, which is used in the replication. They go inside our cells and basically use our own DNA replicators to then create their own kind of little viruses, and then they burst our cells, creating hundreds, possibly thousands more just from that one cell, and then each of those goes into a cell and thousands. So it's a sort of exponential growth, but on the thousands, really. Then, of course, there are bacterial kinds of disease, which I'm sure we're all familiar with. It's just a single-celled organism that comes in, does something nasty in various different ways, and we just sort of react to it, and eventually we produce antibodies, get rid of them that way. Another one that I'd like to mention briefly are prions, which people don't normally think about because they're quite rare, but they are probably the most dangerous. But of the diseases that we want to use for our zombies, we want to go with fungal infections.
So effectively, our zombies will be the worst athlete's foot you've ever got.
Yes. That wasn't that kind of what it was in the game Last of Us?
Yes, it is, and we've got a bit we want to talk about in concerns to The Last of Us, but before we get on to that, we were going to talk a little bit about parasitic relationships and why stuff like parasites and funguses need other creatures to survive, and that kind of relationship that can grow from that.
Right.
So the first one that comes to mind is tapeworms.
So these parasitic worms, people will often tell you that they eat a lot of your food. Well, they don't really. They live inside your intestine, and the amount of nutrients that they take from you are an absolutely tiny amount, and they grow so much from that. But really, the only reason parasites have for being parasites is that they just they can live off you without killing you.
So effectively, parasites boil down to being like small, weak creatures that rely on other creatures to survive. But they're very good at what they do, and they can spend their whole life on you if you're not properly treated, because you won't die.
Right.
But this doesn't fully... The issue with zombies is it's basically turning people into mindless animals.
Right. And it makes them crave specifically certain things.
Yeah. And as much as we are susceptible to parasites, there's not been many recorded cases, if any, of parasites actually controlling their host, surely because it's not in their interest. They want their host to survive and to keep doing their thing so they can survive.
Right.
So what we came to the conclusion of a certain kind of fungal infection that exists in the real world and was actually the inspiration for the zombies in The Last of Us. And that is a certain kind of fungus called what, Joel?
Cordyceps. It's a genus with 400 species, all of which are parasitic.
So cordyceps. Cordyceps are effectively a fungus that can infect living hosts and actually control them, which was the inspiration for the zombies in The Last of Us. So we actually did a bit of research in that, and a bit later on we're going to talk about what that game got right and wrong and how we would change it. So out of what we've been talking about so far, is there anything that's particularly piqued your interest at all? Or?
Oh, I'm actually really interested in how I stop the fungal stuff.
There's the idea of, like, you can get rid of stuff with, like, athlete's foot by talcum powder, like, keeping the environment around it, like, funguses thrive in warm, moist environments. So if you go into a really cold country, you would be pretty fairly safe from our
quite safe.
zombies.
But
there's also something you mentioned earlier, which we talked about kind of on a prior episode, but I think we can answer one of your questions straight away. You were talking about craving flesh.
Right.
We won't go into super amounts of detail because we've already talked about this yet again in our vampire episode when we were talking about why would they want blood.
Which, by the way, sorry to interject this real fast. Have you know the sort of vampire style that they do in Guillermo del Toro, The Strain?
Oh yeah.
That was like when you brought up the parasitic. I was like, oh well, yeah. I guess I could see it turning you into something. I guess I don't know if that's even possible, but
yeah. That's a good point of comparison actually. But in terms of craving stuff, Joel, do you mind touching on what you talked about last time with the whole how vampires are like pregnant women?
Yes, you see, I took the vampire bat, which is very dependent on blood, hence the name vampire bat, and it requires blood because it's rich in protein, but it doesn't have any sort of lipid content in it, so it has to have it pretty much every night. But also, some diseases can leave you being anemic, so low in iron. So our vampires had a disease which made them anemic and therefore low in iron, and therefore, like pregnant women, if a pregnant woman hasn't got enough of a particular nutrient or some such thing, then the baby will sort of send chemical signals so that she will then have cravings for things with that nutrient in it.
For example,
right.
If the baby needs carbon, it will send a message to the mother who's pregnant with it going like, I need carbon, which leads a lot of pregnant women to crave licking coal, which is a really weird thing to want, but it all comes down to chemical signals. So in terms of zombies craving flesh, in terms of other than anything just because they need food, it could come down to a similar anemic issue when they're infected, where they just need something with a high iron content that can be flesh and blood. So yeah, we've talked quite a bit here about what zombies are and how they effectively work and the kind of zombies we're going to be talking about, as well as our basis on The Last of Us and this. Hello, and thank you very much for listening. Cordyceps. We're still here. I think we're going to take a brief break here, and after the break, we can come back and talk more about Cordyceps and what to check out. The Last of Us.
I have a couple things I'd like people to check out for sure. White Tiger Legend has an audio book that just came out. I believe it's on CD Baby and Google Play to start. I'm sure it'll be on iTunes and stuff later. And Duke Grabowski, the mighty swashbuckler. He's out right now on Steam, and we want to make it episodic. I believe there's another episode coming soon, but we want everyone to start checking it out. It's a point-and-click adventure, pretty much like Monkey Island. Done by some of the same people, even.
As always, links will be in the bio. Thank you very much, Erik, and now back to the episode.
Happened to my Transylvania twist.
It's now the mash.
It's now the Monster Mash.
The Monster Mash.
And it's a graveyard smash.
It's now the mash.
It's caught on in a flash.
It's now the mash.
It's now the
Hello and welcome back to the show where we are still joined by the amazing Erik Braa and still talking about zombies. Now, before the break, we talked a bit about different classifications of zombies and the thought process that led us to choosing fungal zombies, as well as a bit about people that have already dabbled in this subject, such as the game The Last of Us. So, now we're back from the break. Joel, do you want to talk a little bit about real-life fungal zombies? What these cordyceps actually do?
Well, it's got about 400 species, and they're found more or less worldwide, usually in warmer climate. And the most famous example is with leafcutter ants in the Amazon. What happens is an ant will breathe in one or two spores of this fungus, and it will grow inside the ant, and the ant kind of goes a bit mad. It loses control of its senses, it starts to struggle in its environment, and the other ants in the colony will sense that something is wrong. So if they don't act quickly enough, then the infected ant will just die, and the fruiting body, which is the sort of reproductive part of the fungus's life cycle, that will sort of grow out of this corpse of the ant and infect the colony. So what happens a lot of the time is a member of the colony will pick up the infected ant, climb up a tree, and leave it there to die. But there's a bit of a problem with that, because when the fruiting body suddenly appears out of the dead body, it's suddenly got a much wider range to infect more ants.
So effectively, we do have cases of real-life zombies in the insect world where funguses will infect animals and basically take control of them to use them as their reproductive organs, which is what The Last of Us is based off of. So what we were thinking here is, in a similar way to The Last of Us, we're going to do that. However, we do think they got a couple of bits wrong. Now, do you remember anything about... I presume you've played the game. Do you remember anything...
I haven't played a lot of it. The voice acting in it is amazing, and I've heard like reads of the actual script. So because I generally am into voiceover, so that's the side I've looked at. But I know that I played the first little bit of it, and it was a lot about like the spores would get on everybody, and they'd breathe them in, and then they would turn into a zombie, basically.
Yeah. One of the biggest flaws we found with the zombies in The Last of Us is certain ones of them were known as clickers, which effectively, because of the spores, they were blind and gained echolocation and found you through time.
So are you saying that this thing can then like just adjust people the way it needs them?
Yeah. Unfortunately, it's not like a battle armor that will like change how it is. Of course, there's like some fantastical elements to games which like you can't make it too realistic, otherwise it would be boring. Like you voice an axe throwing performing executioner in a game, like that's not exactly going to happen in real life. But
well, you never know. Just turn me loose.
So it's just kind of, it's stuff that's not hyper-realistic, no, but...
So there's always going to be a little bit of magic involved.
So we basically, our zombies would not be using echolocation. Some of the things the zombies also had, they had like plates of hardened fungus that were used as armor.
Right.
The only time the fungus actually leaves the body in these ants and the spiders that it can also infect and stuff like that is when it is time to reproduce. It like sends its reproductive organs out the top of its head to then spread its spores.
All right.
Once the infection actually takes hold, it does take on zombie characteristics of running around and like
the brain dead kind of.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So we have these ants and spiders that can get infected, which left us with another big question. Why humans? Why would this disease need to infect humans? Why would the fungus migrate from infecting ants and spiders and other insects into infecting humans? Like, what does it have to gain? Oh,
right. Why couldn't it just be rabid dogs everywhere?
Yeah, exactly. So, like, as a thought, why would you presume that zombies would want after humans? Like, why would they need us?
It's the same species, maybe?
Kind of. We by avoiding a lot of cliches in terms of zombies, we've actually kind of delved into a film cliche. Our zombies are going to be very dependent on environmental damage that we're currently causing.
Mm-hmm.
Effectively, we mentioned earlier that fungus function really well in moist, warm environments.
Oh, so because we're killing the climate?
Can thrive, but the other thing was to do with deforestation, wasn't it?
Yeah, because, of course, I mentioned these ants, the most famous example. But of course, we are cutting down the Amazon rainforest. So the cordyceps, it would have to evolve to find a new host, because each species of cordyceps, it only specializes on one species of animal to parasitize.
So one cordyceps, like a cordyceps that can affect an ant, can't infect a spider.
Okay.
By cutting down the rainforest, we would effectively be taking away its means of reproduction and forcing it to change in order to survive.
Of course, it has to adapt.
It has to adapt, so from doing that, we would maybe force it into occupying mammals or occupying apes. And once you've occupied an ape,
it's very easy.
It's not that far a stretch, right?
It's not that far a stretch to get into a human. So while we couldn't think of any like reasons why humans were the must-have infectee, we could think of a way where they were the best alternative.
Or at least, I suppose, if you're talking about infecting other primates, there are a lot more humans. So then there's a better chance of population increase in this fungus.
Exactly.
So how does it identify that we're a higher species that could help it move up?
It wouldn't essentially...
It's really a case of it survives best in us, or it finds that we make very good hosts.
Natural selection, basically.
Yeah.
What it essentially would be was just sheerly because the funguses that adapted enough to infect humans would just end up spreading more.
Right.
Because there's more of us, and more fungus means more zombies, and more zombies means more fungus.
So it would be not necessarily craving our flesh, but craving another place to thrive.
Effectively, yeah. Which in a sense does kind of link into it craving our flesh, but it's not craving our flesh for food. It's craving our flesh to live in.
But it wouldn't do it when we're living.
Well, that's the thing, actually.
You have to be alive to catch it.
And when something, as we were talking about the cordyceps before, once the creature dies is when it releases the spores, but it can't move once it's dead.
Oh.
Which actually comes out as kind of beneficial.
Right.
There's a lot of stuff done about zombie apocalypses and stuff. Most of them are dead people that are zombies, like in The Last of Us or in The Walking Dead, funnily enough.
Well, Walking Dead, though, is like they imply that everybody is already infected with it. It doesn't affect you until after you're dead.
Oh, okay. That's interesting.
Right. Like they have the whole thing of if you're alive, you're fine. Even if you get bit, you could, I guess, cut off that limb as long as you stop the infection from spreading or stop the. Yeah, from bites, it's like an infection. But people that died like by a broken neck, they still reanimated at some point. It wasn't until the brain is smashed then it finally puts them out.
Okay, that's quite an interesting way of thinking about it, because that would like open up the doors to it being like an airborne infection, for example. Because not gonna lie, biting, it works, but it's kind of inefficient in the way of transferring disease. So if everyone's already got it and it's just waiting for them to die, that actually makes a whole lot of more sense for that series.
That was the weird thing about Walking Dead, was that it happened. You could get bit and infected and die from that, and then of course it took over. But if you died just normally, like you got messed up in a car crash and you're laying there until you die, then you would then reanimate, because apparently the infection's in all of us already.
Oh, okay. So that's actually quite an interesting way to look at it, because it's the whole, does the bite actually give them the infection, or is it just because it's a manky dead guy that's biting you and you end up dying?
Right. That's kind of like, there's that moment where you're like, wait, I don't get that. But then if you cut the limb off, I guess it doesn't, there's no normal, like what would that be? If somebody bit you, like just now, a normal human bites you, and I know that can be, like they say, is like, that's a terrible thing, right? The bacteria alone.
The most dangerous non-venomous part on this planet is human.
So that's how they're dying when they get bit by the zombie, right? Or that's how they're becoming a zombie, because it's the human bite. That's what kills them. But then once they're dead, they're a zombie.
Yeah, that's actually a really, really good way of thinking about it. But our zombies are, in fact, they're not so Walking Dead. They are walking alive.
Right. The Walking Dead, the name, right? But the name is actually about the people that are alive. That's why they call it The Walking Dead, because it's just a matter of time. Like, no matter how you die, eventually you become a zombie. That's the whole thing. That's why, like in the comics, he cuts off his arm or hand or whatever. Like, they cut off limbs because they're like, well, I'll live, but now I have this, and then it's just what's next? What's going to happen until you finally succumb to what is apparently there, no matter what.
Oh, okay. That's a lot deeper than I actually expected. That's actually quite an interesting way of thinking about it, with the whole it basically waiting for your brain function to cease to take control of your brain. But the issue is with being dead is it creates a whole host of problems for the zombies and actually makes a zombie apocalypse pretty impossible.
Yeah, I would think so. I mean, unless there's, I don't know. That's the implication, is there's just something that happened a long time ago that we all didn't know, and it was in one of your shots. I don't know.
One of the main issues is humans are thriving because we're really hard to kill.
Yeah,
we are hard to kill.
Well, with good medical help, we're pretty hard to kill.
Not only that, we're smart, we've got guns, we've got all sorts going on. But if you're a zombie, that's all gone. You're suddenly like a shambling meat bag just waiting for things to eat you. And despite not maybe, like, for example, my city's not full of bears, that's not it. But it's actually the smaller things that would be the biggest issues. Flies, maggots, other detritivores that would just come round and effectively just eat them, and they would be able to do nothing about it. Stuff like hot weather would cause them to decay at an incredibly accelerated rate.
Right.
And it just would make quarantining them, it would make killing them, it just would make it, they just couldn't do anything if they're shambling corpses. However, if they're alive, a lot of this is eliminated. They're no longer decaying,
right,
susceptible to detritivores. They might still injure themselves and not be able to do anything about it, but they are, by all intents and purposes, alive still. So they have no issues that corpses tend to bring with it. Because one of the things we really wanted to focus on was we knew how we were going to get these zombies from the start. There's some people that have already done it, but we wanted to make sure our zombies would take over the world.
Okay.
Now, I mentioned earlier that there's the Pentagon actually has a plan, just in case the apocalypse. And the plan is called CONOP and CONOP 8888. And it's listed here as: the document is identified as a training tool in an all-in-house training exercise where students learn about the basic concepts of military plans and development through fictional training scenarios. So basically, it's an emergency plan to train citizens to have some kind of military training just in case a zombie apocalypse comes out.
All right.
We were talking a bit about how our zombies would survive being alive. Is there a few bits you want to talk about regarding that, in terms of environment and how they would spread and stuff like that?
Yeah, in terms of environment, you mean like temperature? So, for example, temperature. Our planet's getting hotter, which is ideal for fungus. In fact, actually, there's some kind of fungus which is wiping out amphibians, and it's increasing as the planet's temperature increases. It's called chytridiomycosis. I think that's the name of it. I might have missed out a few syllables by accident.
And so if our planet's getting hotter, then there's less cold environments to hide from a fungus, because the one thing that fungus hate is cold.
Yeah.
They really hate cold.
They just freeze over easily.
So fleeing to Canada or fleeing to Russia would be our best bet. But if the ice caps keep melting and our planet keeps getting warmer, it becomes more and more likely that our zombies are going to find you eventually. We also had to think about containing the disease. So, do you remember, I think was it last year or 2 years ago, where everyone thought they had that, what was the disease that everyone was scared about back then?
The bird flu?
No, not the bird flu. It was something that, like, aid workers got in Africa. And
Ebola.
Ebola. Everyone was terrified they had Ebola.
Right. Yes. That was a big thing. Everybody's like, you got the Ebola?
Yeah, the big Ebola scare that was going on. But it actually wasn't all that much of a scare, because it was very easy to quarantine.
Well, I mean, unless you live in Africa.
Physical contact. But actually, I was reading a paper in a lecture the other day, and it turns out that Africa's got the best resistance to Ebola because they've been exposed to it for so long. That really, it's when infected people come across that there's a bigger chance of infection. But even then, just quarantine them. They'll be fine. People do get better from Ebola
because it's all transferred through touch.
Right, but you have to get treatment soon, though, right? Because if you wait too long, it's too late. It doesn't matter.
Fairly soon. And Ebola is a very horrendous disease. But the bottom line is, it's horrendous and people die from it. But it's easy to keep in one place.
Right.
And if our zombies were viral, for example, or bacterial, it would be kind of easy to do that as well. And so that's where another thing about funguses come in, is spores. Like we said, like I said earlier, funguses reproduce through spores, which are airborne. Like the ant has to inhale the spores in order to get affected by this. So our zombies would in theory be able to bite and scratch you and infect you that way, get spores in you that way. But the main way it would actually end up happening was when the zombie effectively does die for real, like the ant, and when the reproductive organs of the fungus emerge and release these spores, they're airborne. Not only are they airborne, but they can be in you and be dormant for a while. So if you've got this fungus in you and you're not noticing and you're walking around and coughing and sneezing and putting more and more out of it into the air, then a lot of people are already infected and it's already too late.
Right.
So for example, the first man that gets it from a monkey doesn't even realise. He's just had a monkey breathing next to him. Like, why would that matter? But he's gone home, he's gone to his family, he's coughed. His kids have got it. His kids then go to school. They cough. The whole school's got it.
Yeah, it spreads fast.
Yeah, exactly. So if this fungus dormant in you for about, I don't know, a month, maybe even less, you could have an entire nation infected without even realising. And once it starts emerging...
By then it's too late. Right.
Making quarantining this pretty much impossible. Now, as with every disease, you're always going to get people who have a natural immunity, a natural resistance, which is where our ragtag group of survivors in this zombie-infested world come in.
They just can't be infected.
They either can't be affected or they're resistant, or, for example, it would probably appear in more warmer countries and third world countries first. So like I said, they could all just be sitting up in Canada watching the rest of the world fall to trash and being like, oh.
Right, so potentially we could be saved by hockey players.
Effectively. Another good thing about this is when it comes to fighting these zombies, kill them dead and they're dead. Like, you don't have to...
But don't they release spores though, right?
Yeah. That's another issue.
So like you'd have to flame them.
That would be a good option. Flame them, stick them in a freezer maybe.
I think freezer might work best because I think some fungal species, not necessarily with fire, but certainly when it gets really hot, that just accelerates the spore process.
Yeah, so what we need
Right.
is soakers filled with liquid nitrogen.
Yes. And then that'll shatter them too, so that'd be a cool way to kill them.
That'd be a cool way to kill them. So, through your work through The Walking Dead, you've learned a lot about that universe, but I think a good question to finalise this on, unless you've got anything else you want to say, Joel?
I don't think so. I think we've covered a lot of this. I've got a little note here, which, because I think normally when people think of zombies, they think of zombie films like Shaun of the Dead or the TV series The Walking Dead, but really they have a much older history. They come from folklore and mythology in Haiti. Thought that voodoo culture sort of got popular there and had this idea that after death, a sorcerer could reanimate a cadaver, but there'd also be an astral plane where the soul goes as well. So there'd be two zombies of a different kind.
Ah, okay, so it's effectively like that's the origin of it in the magic zombies kind of thing.
Worth bringing up. It's kind of a zombie and kind of a ghost.
Oh, cool.
A ghost of their former self.
Yeah, effectively. Well, that's kind of a funny image, isn't it? Like, if ghosts and zombies do exist, does that mean that when you die, your ghost leaves your body and you have to watch your stupid zombie self wander around and walk into the walls?
That would suck. You'd be just sitting there going like, can I get a controller or something? Come on. I don't want to watch myself do this. This is terrible. Do I really look like that from the back?
Yeah, well, that's a weird thought, isn't it? So, yeah. A good question to end on, I think. Having done your The Walking Dead series and now sat here and listened to two British buffoons ramble about mushrooms.
I love it.
Which universe do you reckon you'll have a better chance of surviving in?
That's a good question. I like the cold, so like your spore one would probably be okay for me. But I do love the idea of like, you know, if it comes down to it, you grab your shotgun and you go.
That's very true. That was always like that part of me when I was a kid that was looking at like parts of my school and thinking, that'd be a good hiding place.
Well, you'd have to go. You would have to go like into the mountains or something. So at least you'd have a few months where they wouldn't want to be up there when it's snowing.
I think that pretty much brings this episode to a close. Special thank you to our guest Erik Braa for appearing, a man of many talents and many voices.
Well, thank you. I just want to say thanks that this is awesome, and I love being the student. So thank you for the knowledge.
It's been a pleasure having you. Thank you very much. And so we finalised with fungal zombies that roam the world, just looking for another body to use to reproduce, thriving in warm, moist environment. Honestly, our best bet is running Canada. So you know what, Joel? If this fungal infection spread all over the world,
We would probably die.
So thank you very much for listening, and let's not play God.
Ha 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 ha!